Ms. Phyllis and Ms. Stanley Phelps are co-principals of Successeminars in Newport Beach, California. Their firm specializes in programs to help men and women develop the attitudes and skills for financial success, which they call prosperity consciousness and financial assertion. In our conversation, Phyllis and Stanley share with us some of the key blocks inhibiting many people from being more successful in financial negotiations, and also specific skills for being more assertive in negotiating for money. At the start of the interview, they discuss the importance of seeing negotiating as a game and why that attitude is critical for success.
One of the things we really have a commitment to is looking at money and the game of negotiation and at life as a game, and a really fun game that can be played, and it has rules and regulations for success, but it's truly a joyous game. And if you begin to get people to look at negotiation as a game, a monopoly game, then you're willing to just push that step further to get what you want.
When you start looking at negotiating as a game, what happens to people? They actually see it as more fun and more challenging?
Yeah. There's an element of anxiety or mistrust that just sort of drops from them, and the smile comes forth and they just push forward. It's really an exciting process to go through. And also negotiation is in every aspect of your life. It's not just negotiating for a raise or negotiating for a house. It's really negotiating in your personal relationships. It's in every part of your life, and really beginning to assist people to see that it is there and that it's fun, and that we need to go for everything that we want, because we can always take a step backwards and compromise to some degree. But if you don't go for the ultimate, you're not going to get the ultimate either.
I notice one thing that you offer in your program is helping people feel more comfortable with power and helping them gain the type of position and power that others won't resent. What can you say that would help people understand how to feel more comfortable with power?
Well, I'd like to say a couple of things about power, and that is that people really need to get clear on the true definition of power. Most people think that power is domination or control or influence over other people. And the true definition of power is the ability to be, do, act, or have. And that really transforms people's experience of themselves. And power then is something good. It's not a negative. Many people see power as negatively charged, an evil influence, something that they really shouldn't have, or maybe they have an approach avoidance thing with power. And so we really get into the positive aspects of power.
Stanley and Phyllis, in your programs, you use assertiveness training to help people gain confidence in negotiating for money. And Stanley, you've co-authored the book, The Assertive Woman. Would you give us a description of the assertive person and how the assertive person differs from somebody who is aggressive or non-assertive?
The non-assertive or passive person is someone who's a typical doormat, who really allows other people to make choices for him or her, and who winds up feeling ripped off, complains a lot, but never to the direct source of their frustration. And we all know what it feels like to have a passive person depend on us. It's a big burden. The effect that they have on people is one of frustration, guilt. Sometimes people exploit a passive person, but most of the time they're really frustrated with a person like that who will not take responsibility for their own life. Very dependent type.
Is it a non-assertive person sometimes using power, their own source power, manipulative power?
Yeah. Yes, because they play games such as, oh, no one ever listens to me. And you know what that kind of brings up in you when you hear something like that. So sure, it's a very insidious form of power a very indirect way.
A passive person is usually very unwilling to look at their power, when in fact they frequently have more power than the other person. But they don't want to look at that. They don't want to recognize it.
They get into a game called avoiding domination and dominating. So they're really intimidated by the thought of being dominated and dominating someone else. And so they take a position like this.
All right, let me ask you to contrast the non-assertive person with the aggressive or domineering person.
An aggressive person is really somebody who uses insults, obnoxiousness, any kind of tactic they can to get the desired result. They can use either physical or verbal force, and they're not conscious of what the other person's rights are at all. So what they want is basically to get their own way. Many times a person can come on very aggressively and not really have the intention to hurt, but their style is aggressive and is offensive. And many times we find that insecure people who are afraid that they'll never have anything that they want then have to psych themselves up so much that they really come on strong. By the time they're willing to ask for something, it's really an overstatement. It's overkill. And they annihilate the person that they're trying to communicate with.
Do the aggressive people in this world win?
A lot of times the aggressive people win, and one thing that they win is their mental health over and above the passive person who often winds up on pills and alcohol and or in a mental hospital. So the aggressive person wins to the extent that they are self-expressive, but they don't win very many friends and influence people by being aggressive. And so they lose out in the sense that they're alienated from other people. They really turn other people off.
We all know aggressive people who have a great deal of money and are powerful and have position, but I think that there are more people who are assertive, who have won the wars and maybe lost a few battles along the way, who really make it.
The assertive person wins in that they wind up feeling really good about themselves as a person. And the aggressive person may win externally, but is going through a lot of internal battles and may be struggling with guilt as they are crunching people on the way to the top or whatever. And I think that there's a heavy price to pay for being aggressive. And also that's something that's encouraged for sure in the business financial world. But you pay a very heavy price for that style.
Would you characterize for us now what an assertive person is and how that's critical for being effective in financial negotiations?
An assertive person is a person who is a direct and clear communicator. An assertive person has a good idea of what he or she wants and an ability to communicate that want and to actualize it in the real world. And that really is an incredible skill. This person does this without infringing on other people's rights. They're not only conscious of what they want, but they're also sensitive enough to what the other person's desires and needs are, too, that they don't encroach upon those needs. So an assertive person wins in that they feel good, whether or not they really get everything that they asked for, but they feel so good about the way they put it across, the way they express themselves, and the response that they get from other people that they're dealing with. So that's tremendously rewarding. It's like putting yourself up without putting anybody else down.
Is there a fine line between being assertive and aggressive?
Well, I think for sure we all move between passivity, assertion, and aggressiveness. And that I think a true assertive person has a choice as to which one of those roles they're going to play at which time.
Okay.
Because truly it is appropriate at times to be aggressive. And it is also appropriate at times to choose to be passive. And an assertive person is very clear when and why they're doing that.
All right, how does an assertive person tie in with being successful in financial areas?
Well, one of the ways is being very, very clear on what you want and expanding your wants. so that you're really looking out into the world and looking at your total life, financially, personally, lifestyle, etc., and seeing clearly what you want and setting some goals and then going after it and taking the appropriate steps to reaching those goals and realizing that it's your responsibility, that you take full responsibility for your wants, needs, and goals, and you get there, and that the only person who's in your way is yourself.
What are some of the psychological barriers to being more financially assertive?
Well, I think there are a lot of attitudes that we've grown up with, either through religious education or from our parents or just society in general. And some of those are pretty widely held beliefs, such as money is dirty, only the rich are evil, and not only that, but they're miserable, they're never happy.
You have to work too hard to have it. You have to sell yourself, your own happiness, your own personal relationships in order to have success and money. I have to do too much to have it. Those kind of belief systems that I think go along with money and power and success are one of the barriers that get in people's way. I think another one is also looking at money and success is very significant and very serious, and forgetting to add the element of laughter and humor, and that it is a game and that we should have a really good time playing the money game and bring in levity and joy into all negotiations. It's really looking at the light side and the joyful side of every situation, instead of really getting hooked into the serious, significant part.
Yes, sure. If people are really brought in with a feeling, if they've developed a feeling, really feeling that every time they go into a financial negotiation it's heavy,
right,
it really blocks them in a lot of ways. I would imagine it also blocks their creativity.
Exactly.
Well, it brings up a lot of anxiety and stress, and whenever you have that, your creativity is truly blocked. So it does alleviate a good deal of the anxiety and stress that we carry with us. I think another barrier to effective negotiation is really looking at scarcity rather than abundance. And if we have a feeling that there's only a limited amount, then both people get into grabbing for the tiny bit that's there. But if we look at our world as having abundance and that there's more than enough for both of us, then we get into negotiating to see how we both can have all that we want and more, and realizing that there is truly enough for both of us, and then both of us win.
Are there any assertiveness techniques that would be useful in buyer-seller or financial negotiations?
Yes, the broken record technique is very useful, and that is being able to give out a clear, concise communication and repeat that several times so that the person hears what you're saying. And that's a very valuable technique. Most people feel that if they say something once, then that's it. They're heard, and perhaps they're not heard because the other person is so into getting his point across. Another technique that we teach as an assertive skill is being able to acknowledge the person you're negotiating with, and you can do that either through a compliment or just a simple acknowledgement to let them know that you recognize their wisdom and competency and their negotiation skill and their integrity, etc. And it really helps to alleviate a lot of tension that might be present in a really hot and heavy negotiation.
Okay, a major characteristic of negotiations is intimidation, or the attempt by one person or another to use intimidation. What are some techniques for dealing with anger and intimidation in buyer-seller negotiations?
Okay, disarming an angry person is really a delicate thing to do, and it takes an awful lot of skill. It means being willing not to get angry yourself. And so the first skill it requires is a sense of detachment. And when a person is angry, what we teach the asserter to do is to acknowledge their anger. I really hear you. Hey, you're really angry, aren't you? Wow, I got it. I hear it. And that tends to take fire out of an angry person. And then, after the acknowledgement, there's a clear communication given, such as, I really want to hear what you have to say, and I'll really listen to you as soon as you calm down. When you cool down, I really want to hear what you have to say because I know it's valuable. Okay, and then after that, the person knows where they stand, that they can rant and rave, and they'll be heard as soon as they calm down. And then, of course, the next skill is to listen. You listen to what the angry person has to say, and then you feed back to that person what they've said. Oh, I hear that you're really angry because of thus and so. Yes, okay. And then, and only after all of that, can you voice your own opinion and say, well, now I'd really like to share with you how I feel. But that's a totally non-defensive way of dealing with an angry person. And if you fight anger with anger, you'll get an escalation, which will result in some type of war, and you just don't get anywhere.
Are there any subtle attempts at manipulation that occur in buyer-seller negotiations? And how do you deal with them?
Well, I think one of the things that can happen is people use anger as a method of persuasion, as an intimidator. And most people are concerned about conflict. They don't want to deal with conflict, so it works, and they continue to use it. And if you're comfortable with conflict, and if you have some techniques for dealing with anger, then you can cut through that person's method, his anger, and in fact disarm that person.
It depends on who you're negotiating with. If you're negotiating with someone that's an intimate friend or relative, then they can emotionally blackmail you. They know what areas of vulnerability you have, and they can push those buttons. And they know that if you have a fear of being left, then they can say, well, oh, that's okay. I'll just leave. And they know that they've got you over a barrel. And in a buyer-seller situation, the person who's pushing the other person may try to find out what their vulnerability is and then play for that and manipulate with that.
I'd like to ask you for some more input on that. What are some other types of manipulation that are used in buyer-seller relationships?
One way that people try to manipulate each other is by asking for something unreasonable. And a way to counter that is to agree with the person and let them see the ridiculousness of their request. For example, if one says, I want you to go to the bank and I want you to withdraw all your money because I need $4,000 right now. And so the other person can, instead of saying, oh, you stupid, I'm not going to do that, they can say, great, I'll just go down to the bank right now and let's see, where's my checkbook? I'll just get my checkbook out and write you a check for $4,000. And then, this is a silly example, but then the person can see the ridiculousness and they'll back off and say, well, gee, it really is ridiculous for me to ask you for that. And that's more of a direct manipulation. I think a lot of manipulation is very indirect and very subtle. And people are really saying something different externally than they're really meaning. So one way to recognize a manipulation is to think, what does he mean, rather than what is he saying. So one of the skills we teach is to focus on the meaning rather than focusing on the words themselves, because that's a way to get trapped. People get really hooked into, well, you said it was red. Well, no, you said it was blue, and that type of thing. And instead, if they can just hook into what is the essence of what that person is manipulating for.
And feedback that essence
Mhm.
to the other person as a clarification. You
okay.
mean you want
Mhm.
this and this from me.
Mhm.
And the person then will either have to say yes or, well, no.
That's not what I really meant.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then you'll begin to get more clear on what they really want. And if you begin to question and question and question, pretty soon you're going to come to their bottom line. What is it that they really want? What are they really trying to say? And then you can deal with that.
I was going to ask you for some examples of people that you've worked with and how this is prosperity consciousness and financial assertion has impacted their lives, but maybe it might be more appropriate to ask you how it's affected your lives.
I think bringing it right down to home is really very appropriate.
One of the ways I can share how it's affected my life is really looking at money and financial assertion as a game that we play, and really testing the limits out there for myself. And one recent way in which I did that was renting a house for the first time in a number of years, and having gone through my life always accepting the given price as the price, and instead going out and really testing everyone's limits as I looked at houses, and finding that there was not one person out there who did not come down in price and come down to my price, and also being willing to put myself out there, negotiate with them in terms of really letting them know why they should have me as a renter, why I am their perfect renter, and why they should come down to my price. And I can't tell you what ridiculous prices I got people down to. And it was fun, and it was a game, and they really came out feeling that they had won, and I definitely felt that I had won. And at the point where I knew that I had reached their bottom limit, or where I'd reached mine, then there was a compromise. And it was joyous for all of us concerned, I'm sure.
Why was it joyous for the people that you were negotiating with?
Well, they were very clear that they had a person renting, they had a renter that they wanted.
So you were, in a sense, negotiating to their wants.
Right, right. I didn't just go in and offer a lower price. I really told them why they needed me as a renter.
That's interesting.
Pretty smart, isn't it?
Very good.
And the truth is, you know, I am their perfect renter.
Uh-huh.
There are a number of reasons why I should be renting their home for them. And I think people being willing to take that risk and really putting ourselves out there and letting people know who we are and why we're so great and why they should negotiate with us is a good part of the negotiation. And we're all a little timid to do that.
I'd like to raise another situation. How do you ask for a raise?
I think one of the first things, the most important thing, is to really take a look at your own self-worth and realize that whatever you're wanting, you're probably worth. And I think most people are unwilling to really raise the price for their own usefulness and to really get clear on what you're wanting. And then what I would suggest is go in wanting even more than that. Jack the price up even a little bit more so that you have some leverage to negotiate with. To prepare, to really truly be prepared. One, how you can service your company or your boss, what you're really giving to that person, why they should give you a raise, what they're going to get from you that they couldn't get from other people. And most people are nervous about doing that. They're a little embarrassed to really put themselves out in such a way. And again, I encourage people to think big. I mean, really think big in those terms. Brag, if you want to use it, say it that way. And be prepared, have it written up, have it typed up. Go in, be very businesslike about the whole situation and handle it. And most people can't counter that. I mean, you have what you want and you have a case for why you deserve it.
You have the facts.
You have all the facts, and there it is, black or white.
Timing is of the essence,
Yes.
too. A great strategy to use is wait until they need you the most. And then right before you're going to deliver the goods, you go in and ask for a raise. And it's kind of hard to refuse that. And another thing that's really important is to go into a negotiation for a raise prepared with a written list of your accomplishments and contributions to the company so that it is very clear to the boss that you know exactly what your contributions are, and it may even benefit you to send copies of that and let others know that you are negotiating for a raise too, especially if you know that some strategic people support you. That way you'll have a lot more leverage.
What advice do you give people to help them build a successful financial plan?
Well, one of the things that we do is we start out with really encouraging people to find out what their financial net worth is. And this is often quite mystical to most people. They just think they have a sense that they're either broke or they have some money and they're not even sure how much it is. And so one of the things we do is we give them a homework assignment, and we've devised a form for them to fill out called Computation of Net Worth, your statement of assets and liabilities. And we have them complete this. And if they don't know how to complete it, we tell them to seek someone's guidance who knows how to complete it. And so that they come to a figure which represents their net worth. And this is a start. Once you know what you're worth, then you have a decision to make. And that is, do you want more? What do you want to do with the money that you have, etc. And so we take a look then at the specific areas in which people want to start dealing. And, that may be investing, different types of investments or whatever.
Getting clear on what you want. I think most people will say, well, I want money or I want financial independence, but they're really not clear on what that truly means to them specifically. And so assisting people to be totally clear on what they want, and then also taking full responsibility for getting what they want. So it isn't the world out there that is giving or not giving to them, but it's really they're the source of everything that they want. And then once they're clear on what they want and they're taking full responsibility for it, then it's a rather simple matter to sit down and plan a strategy for life, for 5 years, for 1 year, 6 months, this week, and then begin to take one step at a time. And so frequently, this is very mystical again to people, and they don't realize that you can get where you're going if you will just begin at step one and take one little step at a time.
You hear a lot of people say, well, what I want is to be a millionaire. But if you sit them down with paper and pencil and have them write out how much money they want to spend on cars, how much money they want for living expenses per month, how much money they want in a savings account, how much money they want in their checking account, how much money they want for trips and travel, they will arrive at a different figure. And for the first time in their life, they'll say, my God, you mean I can have all that for only $50,000? I thought it would cost $1 million. So that is...
They get more realistic about their expectations, and that probably helps them become more motivated to achieve those expectations.
Yes.
And to begin to really see that they can achieve them. That it isn't just this mystical idea out in front of them that they'd like to have and there's no way they can have it. But in fact, they can have it, and there are some simple ways to do that.
And one of the things that Phyllis and I do in our business is that we have projections of how much money we want to be making every month for the next 6 months to a year. And that's very, very helpful to us. It gives us something concrete to aim for.
I noticed that one aspect of your program is titled Investing Dollars in Yourself. Now I've heard of investing in the stock market, but what does investing in yourself mean?
Well, when you really look at it, you are the most important person in the world, and it seems ridiculous that you would invest in the stock market and a number of other things and not invest in yourself. So beginning to look at it in that way, and then decide where you want to go and how you can best get there. And maybe your best true investment would be to invest in yourself. That could be a marketing person for a product that you have. That could be your business of your own. I mean, there are various ways you can invest in yourself. It may be a new wardrobe to assist you in your career.
Or it may be spending a certain amount of money to take a financial assertion seminar.
Right. Yeah. Professional and personal growth is incredibly important. And that's an investment in ourselves that some people put at the bottom of their list. And I think it sometimes should be at the top.
It's taking care of yourself then.
It's taking care of yourself.
And being willing to spend money on yourself. Some people are so generous with others, and they'll buy themselves new cars or any number of possessions, and they will not spend money on their own physical or mental health. They're very cheap when it comes to that.
Miss Nancy Spero is an attorney at the Los Angeles law firm of Macdonald, Halsted, and Laybourne. She has had extensive experience in negotiating, including the resolution of complex business litigations. She is also a faculty member on AMR's seminar, Negotiating Skills for Women Executives. In our conversation, she gives us 9 specific tactics useful in a wide range of financial negotiations. Nancy, what are some common strategies that are used in negotiations?
Well, Ed, I have a list of what I consider to be the 9 most common tactics that are used in negotiation. Having talked with many people who negotiate in business and in teaching my course on negotiation, I've come up with these 9 tactics. They really are not the only tactics that are used, and there are variations, of course, but I'd like to talk about the 9 of them, and then that'll give us an opportunity to discuss how one should use them and how to countermeasure them if they're used by someone else. First tactic is the strategy of making the initial offer. Now, I have heard for many years that it is absolutely cardinal rule that one must not make an initial offer when you're negotiating something. Now, when you ask people what's the purpose of this rule, they don't really know. The reason for this rule is that you may be surprised if you end up being the recipient of the initial offer. For example, if you are forced into making the initial offer, you may hit some area that the other side would accept initially. You may surprise them, and they may get something that's more advantageous than they ever thought. Whereas if you can hold back and get the initial offer from them, you may be on the receiving end of that advantageous initial offer, or you may want to reevaluate your position. So always it would seem that the first person to give up information has a disadvantage, all things being equal. But if you are in a situation where you feel you want to make an initial offer, and there's certainly no reason not to, it's just a little formal convention we have in Western negotiation, do so wisely. Now, in order to make an initial offer, you have to analyze your situation thoroughly. You really have to know where you are and what you want and what you think the other side wants. Mm-hmm. Now, if you have both sides' desires in mind, you can propose something which makes a lot of sense and also presents the most advantageous position for yourself as possible. You want to maximize your goal in that initial offer. As far to the max as you can go, and yet with some reason for it. That's where you want to make your initial offer. The purpose for making that initial offer very high is to minimize their expectations. If they think you're going to make an offer of $1,000 to buy something from them, and you end up making an offer of $500, they may reevaluate this situation and think that perhaps they should accept a little less money than they had originally analyzed. So in other words, when you make your initial offer, make it to the maximum you think is justifiable and be ready right then and there to justify it. Because that's when your persuasion is so very useful, because that's when you begin to chip away and get them to come to your point of view. The final solution will end up being where both sides conclude that they will be happy with something, or they will both walk away and not make a deal. And the second technique or tactic I've encountered is the final offer. Someone who says very strongly, This is it. I'm not going to talk to you anymore. This is my last and final offer. Accept it or reject it. It became famous by the use of a very famous president of General Electric years ago called Bulwer. And he negotiated labor contracts for years using this technique. And because he had the credibility, because everyone knew it was his final offer, they either accepted it or walked away, and in those labor contracts they were always accepted. Now, very few people have the credibility Mr. Bulwer had. And when you hear someone making a last and final offer, particularly if they do not have the track record or the reputation of making last and final offers, you can pretty much assume that it's not. And you have to give them a very polite, tactful way of retreating from what would seem to be a last and final offer. The very worst thing for you to do, really, is to make it difficult for them to retreat, because it's both your interests to come to an agreement somewhere, and you don't want to come to an agreement where this last and final offer is. So therefore, make it easy for them to change it. Give them a new context or a hypothetical, or perhaps change one of the elements, or say, talk about one of the elements exclusively and see if you can get them to budge on that. Also, another way to deal with a last and final offer is listen to it. Listen to what is said and listen to what is not said. Because oftentimes what seems to be a last and final offer is not. That's the last I want to talk to you about this. Well, maybe that person who's saying that will speak to someone else. 99 times out of 100, last and final offer is not that. And you have to assume that you're going to be able to go from there. At least you have to work on it. Give them an opportunity, a face-saving way of getting out of it. And another way of dealing with it is let them know what they have to lose by deadlocking. They have as much to lose as you by not coming to an agreement. In other words, they're talking to you to get something from you, and they may not want to walk away from it as much as you. So use your persuasion, not only on the substance of the deal, but also personally, they may have an interest in continuing talking with you. Another way to deal with it is you can test it by walking out. But again, you can test it and walk out, leaving yourself a way to come back in. You can say, you don't want to talk about it anymore unless they wish to renew some discussions on a certain element, and you know they're going to want to talk about that. Give yourself a high probability way of getting back in, but you can test it. Another way is to get angry. You'll be surprised how many very tough negotiators really crumble when someone gets angry at them, particularly when this anger follows a great deal of time where you've been acting very reasonably. So it would seem that this anger in the context is an extreme reaction, and justified, you would say, by their extreme behavior of the last and final offer. And a third tactic that I've encountered is something called fictional issues, or the big pot tactic. Now, this means that someone will present you with a proposal which has not only the issues they're interested in, but issues they're not interested in, and you have no way of knowing. This is a very difficult tactic to deal with. Not impossible, though. The reasons people use the big pot tactic, and I suggest in the proper situation we all should, is to reduce the other person's aspiration level. In other words, you've got some elements you know you're going to concede away on. In order to provide yourself with trading room, in order to assure others within your own organization that you're a hard bargainer, and in order to make it easier to sell the ultimate deal to people within your own organization. So the big pot tactic is quite useful, and I use it oftentimes in settling lawsuits. Now, let's say, for example, that someone gives you something which you suspect to be fictional issues. For example, you're contracting to lease a computer equipment, and the lessor you're the lessor, and the lessee wants all sorts of warranties, and they want service, and they want training for the operators, and they want an exit clause, meaning they want to get out of the deal in 3 months if they find a better machine. They want all sorts of terms in the agreement. Your standard lease just has time and money. Now, how do you deal with these which you suspect to be fictional issues? First of all, you have to have patience. You cannot resolve a deal when you suspect there to be fictional issues with great speed. You have to work on it piece by piece, and you start by testing each of the issues. You give the person hypotheticals. For example, well, we've never trained operators before. How would you feel about getting your operator training through an independent contractor? We might be able to find some people who would be capable of doing that for you. And then listen to the answer. Oftentimes people will tell you either expressly or impliedly how they really feel about that issue.
Is it through body language or some other types of clues that you can pick that up?
All kinds of ways. Of course, the more perceptive you are, not only of the words, but also the manner in which it's said, helps you. Another technique of testing the big pot is to ignore or bypass suspected straw issues. See how important it really is to them. Maybe they'll forget about it too. You can also protest. You can say they're clouding the issue. You came here to lease out of computer equipment and you didn't want to talk about warranties and service contracts. That's something that nobody ever has brought up to you before, and there's no reason to talk about it now. See how they react to that. Certainly I recommend that you extend your emotional behavior in negotiating, not just in the fictional issue area, but in all areas. There are proper ways to behave in business, but if you behave reasonably at times and behave unreasonably at times, if you behave logical at times and illogically at times, it works. There are uses and reasons to do all these things, and perhaps getting angry at the proper moment might just serve you well. A fourth tactic that I've observed is something called the boogie tactic. This is just a little word I use. What a boogie tactic is someone saying there's an arbitrary rule why they can't do what you want them to do. We've all heard, well, the sale ends on Sunday, and Sunday is the last day to buy everything at the reduced price. Monday the prices go up. That's a boogie. It may or may not be true. And it's up to you as a good negotiator to test it out. Too few people really test out these boogies. For example, what makes Sunday so special? Why not Monday? What if you need to find out how your credit is, or what other suppliers are going to do for you on that, and you do need the extra few days? Maybe you can negotiate the boogie.
Nancy, I've come across some examples in my own life where that's happened.
Mm-hmm.
And you find a great deal of flexibility which wasn't apparent at the start.
That's right. I think that we've all experienced it, and the thing to remember is just to test it when it happens. Another thing is, don't give something for nothing. If they're giving you a boogie on something, you give them back a boogie. Something that you want, but you feel that is a reasonable quid pro quo, or a reasonable value for what that boogie is. And if they feel that that is not reasonable, then you ask to renegotiate the boogie. That's what I recommend.